But I think we should commence nonetheless. I'm going to introduce you to the panelists that we have here on the stage. And our first panelist is Valerie Courtois, and she is the director of the Aboriginal Leadership Initiative at the International Boreal Conservation Campaign. Valerie, this is Valerie. There we go, everybody. And she is a member of the Innu community of Mastiwats. Valerie is a professional forester who has over 10 years of experience in Aboriginal issues, forest ecology, and ecosystem-based management and planning. And joining Valerie today are two students that she has worked with, right? And our students are Kirsten Tanchi from Fort Simpson, NWT, Kirsten, and Robbie Dick, and he is from Ross River, Yukon. And they're going to be sharing with us as well. We also have on the stage James Stotch. And James is the director of the Institute for Community Prosperity at Mount Royal University. He brings with him nearly 2 decades of experience working in philanthropy, previously serving as a foundation executive and nonprofit sector consultant. He's also the founder and director of Eighth Rung, a consultancy focused on leadership and network development, policy scoping and analysis, citizen-driven strategic planning and evaluation, and helping communities, foundations, and industry establish strong relationships based on equity, trust, and openness. And our final panelist is Dr. Erin Freeland Ballantyne. She is the Dean of the Dicinta Center for Research and Learning, a Northern-led initiative delivering land-based, University of Alberta accredited educational experiences led by Northern leaders, experts, elders, and professors to engage Northern and Southern youth in a transformative curricula based on the cutting-edge needs of Canada's North. Dr. Ballantyne was born and raised in Sambuca, Yellowknife on Acacho territory and was the first Rhodes Scholar from the Canadian North. So these are our panelists. And what I'm going to do is not yell into the mic again. Okay. What I'm going to do is I'm going to ask them some questions, just some sort of general conversation, questions that may pertain to any of their works. And then what we'll do is just quickly, I think, go into a Q&A, just because I think that will help facilitate some really interesting discussion, because we have really distinct experiences here and that are really interesting. So you may want to ask a question of one member of the panel or all of them. So I think either way is fine. So I'm going to start off by talking to this question, which is, what are the key pressure points that you have faced within the Academy? So in terms of implementation of your work, your programming, what do you feel are challenges within the Academy?
I got past the mic, Chimagwich, Messi. It's an honor to be here today on Treaty 1 territory, homeland of the Métis, and with our awesome Dicinta Boreal Guardian students. Pressures I think that we face in the Academy, and this is an ongoing conversation, is the recognition and the respect that Indigenous knowledge and values can be higher education and are higher learning and are central to building strong communities. And I think that's an ongoing conversation that we have. And even when we hear calls to indigenize the Academy, it's critical that we're moving that beyond sort of tokenism to actual practices of respect and reciprocity. So I think that's one of the biggest challenges that we face, but also some of the most important work that we've done around changing policies at universities, such as recognizing our elders as professors at equal level as university professors. So that's definitely a challenge we face and some of the changes that we've seen happen.
No, that's fine.
I think I'm automatically mic'd. Can you hear me? Hi. So pressure points. Just so first of all, I as well want to acknowledge that we're on Treaty 1 territory and the homeland of the Métis, and thank the elders for their words this morning and last night. And happy to be inspired to throw away my notes from the speakers last night as well. I just briefly on Mount Royal University, which has only recently become a university the last 6 years, even though we've been a community college for 110 years. Part of what we face and what I worry about is the student experience. Students, I think, face a conflict between, on the one hand, especially if they're business students, we encourage and require all students to have a base of what we call general education, which is really liberal arts education. And ideally, in its purest form, it's the education you need to become a free citizen and an active citizen, a free person and an active citizen. So that's great, and then they take business courses, but I worry that students are being tugged in different directions. On the one hand, they're being told, you know, you go to university to have a career and to find a job and to be materially successful in life. On the other hand, they're being encouraged to think critically and to critique the very system on which we're hoping that students embed themselves. And that's got to be very strange to try and reconcile. And I don't think we do a good job of that. And so I think one of the opportunities, this may be naive, is to try and weave those things together so you can do good and do well. But more than that, you can embed business and purposefulness and weave those two together in interesting ways. So just a brief shout out, I should say there's a few of our students here. Anyone from MRU? Any students? Can you stand up and just give a wave?
Hi guys.
Awesome. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think, you know, coming from a partner perspective and someone outside the academia, but who's really working on the challenge of encouraging and growing Indigenous leadership, particularly in youth in Canada, you know, it's really important for academia to respond to that shift and change as it's happening, which is sometimes hard for large, older institutions. And so, you know, that's why we really appreciate working with institutions like the Shinta on the Boreal Guardian program, because it's something that's very responsive to the actual and current needs that are being expressed, not only by the students themselves, but the communities and their leadership and their elders and their visions in their culture. So I think that's a very important thing for academia to do, and certainly to recognize that, you know, Indigenous peoples have a very real science and a very real system around managing that cultural responsibility to lands in particular, and recognizing that system in play in academia is very interesting to me, and it's encouraging that there are institutions here in Canada who are doing that.
Can I ask a question sort of on this note, and this would be largely directed to Valerie and Dr. Aaron, is do you find that there are opportunities to create curriculum based on this knowledge? Is that actually what you're doing? And so that the knowledge keepers help develop some sort of curriculum that's going to be utilized?
I guess so. The model that we operate from is collaborative community-based curriculum. So that means that the community will identify something that we need to develop a program on. So one of the first programs we developed was on Indigenous self-determination in theory and in practice. And that was developed first at a kitchen table level, a community level, and then a cohort of elders, knowledge keepers, politicians who had negotiated land claims, leaders and Indigenous professors all working together. And they work together to develop the curriculum, and then they also teach it together. So that's the format in which we do all of our curriculum. It's collaborative, it's intergenerational, and it's taught on the land, and people bring their kids. So we have babies to elders, and we all learn together. So that's how we generate learning.
Yeah, that certainly respects and reflects the kind of learning that we're used to having as Indigenous peoples in the country. You know, we're very much an experiential people. We learn by observing and trying, and that model of curriculum development, integrating that way of learning is very important, particularly with our intergenerational trauma resulting from residential schools and the changes in education systems that people have been imposed, recognizing that need to be really in the land, on the country, and doing and being who you are while framing that into a curriculum vision is very important. And it's really resulted in elders and youth being able to come much closer together as generations, despite some of those breaks that we all know well.
I find it very interesting, and I'm sure many of our audience, our participants here do as well, because I've often thought this sort of where we characterize our generations prior. You know, for myself, I'm a baby boomer, so you know, it's for my generation and even younger. I find where we kind of characterize, you know, our previous livelihoods and lifestyles as not having any merit within like an academic setting. And so you will hear people say, oh, I'm the first person to graduate in my family. Well, you know, our grandparents didn't grow up in this system. So I always think that it's sort of this devaluing that we've been taught systemically about our own systems and our own traditional livelihoods. And so it's really fantastic to hear about the emergence of what you use the term indigenizing either space or curriculum. And so this is very exciting, and it is becoming a part of the, I think, accepted sense about traditional knowledge. And so it's very exciting that you share this. I'd like to ask one question as well for James, and this is that how have you been able to create success in your work for your students?
I think I'm good. Well, I want to start by acknowledging and honoring the fact that one of my colleagues is here, Catherine McGowan, who is a huge part of the success, I think, at the business school at Mount Royal in terms of activating what we call social innovation curriculum. And by that, we have a whole program of study that is currently a minor, and there'll also be kind of a major equivalent, a concentration we call it, that is built around three core concepts: empathy, courage, and creativity. And so all the courses layer onto that, you know, from a knowledge base to a very applied understanding of those concepts. And we've been able to get those new courses and that new programming in the ground way quicker than I ever dreamed. And part of the success is that we have a very supportive dean who gets it, Valerie Kinnear, who has required that all faculty figure out how they are understanding their role as treaty people, as she puts it. And for, I think, a dean of a business school to set that tone is really, really vital. Deans are really important for activating action in the academy. And so the... Apologies. So I think that would be, you know, one thing that we've been able to really achieve. The other thing that comes with that is the introductory course in social innovation. We have convinced the business school to make that available in the core curriculum for all business students, which means that we've gone from, you know, maybe 20 people in a year taking that course to now well in excess of a couple of hundred people taking the course. And finance majors and marketing majors and HR majors and so on, which is really cool. And it means that there is a commitment to go beyond corporate social responsibility and to think about how you are preparing business students for the recognition that business's role in society is shifting and that its responsibility is what we might call to the common good at some level. As Jeffrey Hollander, the founder of Seventh Generation, phrases it, or that in fact business at some level has to recognize in a deeper way that that there is an accountability to everyone because we are all related, and that's a critical kind of new understanding that I think is success, and we'll see how that goes.
My mind is racing like crazy. I want to ask you all a million questions. But I think what I'll do is ask you one more question. That was sort of, part of the series of questions that they asked me to bring up here before we open it up, because we're going to run out of time very quickly. But I'm going to ask each of you, what is the role of the Indigenous community? Well, you've talked about this, Dr. Aaron, so I'll say, what does the future of Indigenous education in the Academy look like? What does the future of Indigenous education in the Academy look like?
I think that the future of the Academy should be determined by the revolution that's happening in Indigenous education. And I think that what the future is a complete sort of flip, and it's taking it outside of buildings and outside of structures and bringing it back onto the land. And one of our other professors, Francois Paulette, says it just back into the circle. So I think that that's what's happening, and that's what's going to create a lot of that innovative change, because we're changing who's talking to each other and how and what it's about, and most importantly, where it's happening. And so, we say like the land is our most important professor. So that's the part of the change, I think.
As an organization that's working on developing leadership right across the country and hoping to develop, and help facilitate this emergence of new generations of leaders, particularly in this context of an ever-shifting kind of baseline of the relationships that we have with other Canadians, that the future looks just like this, like our two Boreal Guardians that are sitting next to me. And the Boreal Guardian program is an exciting innovation, I think, in the way that we are thinking about how do we tool ourselves to be able to manage our lands in our own ways, according to our own values, and respecting our own cultural responsibility. And this is, both in a physical sense, but also in a very spiritual sense, which is something that's very interesting about this Boreal Guardian program. We address that relationship, not just from a direct kind of management point of view as a forester, I do that all the time, but also kind of what does that mean for our relationship? What does that mean for our responsibility to the caribou master? What does that mean to all those kinds of cultural aspects? And this cultural awakening that we're experiencing now is exciting, and I think it'll be a benefit to the whole of the world for us to live that and thrive in that context. And so, I think the future looks just like this.
Can we hear from Kristen and Robbie? Would you like to speak to that? What does Indigenous education look like for the future, or even for now? What is that experience for you?
Well, kind of saying what Val was saying, it's kind of us. So through the program, what we learned was a really natural way of learning. We'd be sitting by the fire learning about colonization, sustainability. I've attended post-secondary education institutes in the South, and personally it just didn't really work for me. Sitting in a room with four walls just didn't feel natural. It's a whole new holistic way of learning, and it's really brought me back to my community and wanting to play more of a role within leadership in my community and just to help my community in a more holistic way.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. That's what I think too. I'm from Ross River. I'm a Kaska, and the Kaska are known for being stewardships of the land. And I was told by an elder that we don't really own the land. We are just taking care of it for the next generation coming up. And Kaska right now is battling with the government of Canada to sell our land off. And it's been a struggle for my nation right now. And we're unsigned and we're unsettled. It's a pretty big struggle, and we're trying to teach our younger generation right now how to be the stewardship of the land, because there's a gap between the youth and the elders, and we're trying to get them back on the land. Try to teach them, just to connect with the land again, because that's who we are and that's who we represent. As a young Indigenous person right now, and I've been, been through struggles of alcoholism and all that, and I'm trying to change my life around. And for last year, I've been sober, and I'm trying to encourage younger people to do the same. yeah, I'm trying to encourage young people in my community just to step up and be a leader, like just live off the land, and I'm trying to encourage those younger generations to do the same thing, and it's kind of a challenge, but eventually we'll get there. It's a fight. Thanks.
Robbie, can I just, I'd like to follow up a little bit with both of you. Robbie, first you had mentioned a gap between generations, so between the elders and the young people that are coming. This gap, do you see that this is your role in terms of what you've been learning as a steward of the land through your education? Is that part of filling that gap, and is that how you envision your future?
Yeah, it's kind of hard, but it's what I want to learn. I want to actually, sorry. I want to figure out why there's a gap. Like I can see a lot in communities, not only in Ross but all over in the Yukon there. And just it's sad to see. Got an elder in Ross right now. He's Amos Stick, and he's about 90 years old, and still he doesn't cease to amaze me because he's always living off the land. Makes drums, he makes snowshoes, and he's still going strong. And there's people walking by, like kids, they're just on their iPods and all that. They don't acknowledge that traditional knowledge, and it's sad to see. And I want to do something about it, but they're just kind of hard right now. Hopefully, I could be the solution of that in my hometown and try to help out, like bring them closer, like the example. And I want to bridge that gap, and I want to help out somehow.
Really profound experience in terms of the education that you're doing now, in terms of that traditional knowledge and the traditional understanding of the land. It's so exciting. And I just want to mention one more thing. One of my best friends is a First Nations doctor, and she always works in Northern Canada, and she said that the old people have the thinnest charts in any community. She says because they still eat traditional food, they don't take medicine, and they walk or do activity every single day. And so that when you talked about that elder, that's what it reminded me of. And he's 90. It's so great. Kristen, I was going to ask you, in terms of this idea of having access to an Indigenous education model or program that is in the North, where you see yourself as having a future in your community, that idea, that model, do you see that model as something that's necessary to keep going for so that your communities thrive?
Definitely. It would be amazing if everyone in the Northwest Territories were actually able to take a program like Deshinta or the Indigenous Boreal Guardianship Program. Not only does it create a local knowledge economy, employing people like elders and people that live off the land and giving the economic ability and skill to do what they love. It's really given me, and I think it would give the Northwest Territories more in-depth look of where we all come from, our political background, our economic history, our cultural history. It would just be amazing. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Masi. And anybody have any questions now? I think what I'll do is we'll bring the mic around, and if we have about 12 minutes, 13 minutes. So if we can keep our questions fairly short, I would really appreciate that. And so I will bring the mic over to Tom here. I know Tom, he's from Manitoba. So here you go.
Welcome panel to Winnipeg, Manitoba, and Treaty 1 territory, Métis homeland. I'm a graduate of the SEER program, which had to deal with the Center of Indigenous Environmental Resources, which I think was a grounding plate for your boreal. We were the final graduating class because we were kind of the rebels. We pushed the limits to the government in regards to protecting land and water. So my question is, first I want to say I love the program that you guys are doing, but how do we keep it from becoming colonized? What I mean by that, this is our knowledge. And the only way the colonizers will listen to us is if we have a degree. We have a Bachelor of Science, Bachelor of Environment, Bachelor of Conflict Resolution. Now, what I'm afraid of is what has happened in the States. You had people die who attended ceremonies that were run by non-Indigenous people, such as the Sweat. What I see is this is their way of, okay, we're learning your ways. We will take over, and now we will tell you what is best. And we're losing that, and then our elders and our youth won't have that control over what is theirs now. They're going to say, no, you don't have a degree. Instead of, our degree is the land, and it's from the elders. And my elders always told me, we don't need a piece of paper to tell us who we are. We have our ceremonies, we have our ways. So how do we protect that without it becoming colonized? So I guess it would be for the whole panel that are the instructors. How do we stop it from becoming colonized?
You should start.
Well, I think first, and I preface that, like, I'm a settler that was born in the north, and I come from a mixed settler Indigenous family. So I share blood with my Indigenous siblings and my non-Indigenous siblings, and I think that you constantly remain vigilant, and it's always going to be a fight, because colonization isn't over. It just has a really friendly face sometimes for some people. And so it's, for me, and I feel like, my role as a settler is to protect that space and push back against the encroachment of the ongoing colonization of knowledge and of people's hearts and minds, and push back against that and try to make sure that there's space for Indigenous space and Indigenous learning. And I can be an interlocutor with the academy because I have a PhD, where I can push for, there to be some respect and some reciprocity, but it's constantly remaining vigilant and making sure that the youth are taking that space and owning that space and becoming those leaders. Because if we can, when we say we arm yourself with knowledge, if we can arm them with a degree that's based on 4 years of being on the land with their elders, they're unstoppable. And for right now, if we need that piece of paper, it's making sure we equip them with whatever weapons they need to make the change that has to happen. So.
Yeah, that was a really good question, and a tough one to answer. In my original notes, I had a stat to the effect of 23% of Canadians have a post-secondary degree or university degree, 7% of Aboriginal people. And the reason I didn't actually, I was reticent to use that was precisely what you're saying. Is it even a good thing to have a university? Like, is that something we're collectively desiring? And I think your point is totally valid. All I can say is, the original idea of a university going back to Bologna, University of Bologna, 1088, was an anti-colonial model. It was the idea to create a free space where people can think outside of the encumbrances and the orthodoxies of the church or the king. And I think in many ways we've lost that as institutions, and we need to stay true to that. And I look at Deshinta and I think, wow, that's cool, because it's rooted in culture and it's bringing the experience to the people and involving the people of the land and knowledge holders who aren't credentialed in that sense as teachers, and validating that. And we need to do a whole lot more of that. And not to say that it's a perfect solution, and I think we're fumbling our way through the dark, but it seems like a lot more like what a university ought to be than what we're stuck with right now and that we need to change.
Yeah, and I think, in this era of increasing recognition of our titles and rights and responsibilities, and we're really exercising those in the best way we can. I've been a manager of environment office, and I've had to plan for lands and plan for a guardians program and doing all this stuff. My elders have always told me that my responsibility is to try to make the best decision with the best information I have, no matter where that comes from. And so making sure that our information, which is often the best information, if you think about, for example, for caribou management, caribou science, all the caribou that are managed in Canada right now are based on science on the collar data. You see those caribou wearing the collars. The first collar was installed in 1982 in Canada, in Labrador. And so that science of how to manage that caribou isn't even as old as a cycle of caribou populations. And so whereas Indigenous relationships, I'm in, we've had a relationship with caribou for 10,000 years, we know about caribou. We know how it tastes, we know a name for every part. We use everything about it. If I'm going to make a caribou plan, I need to lean on that good knowledge. And that's the responsibility of us all, I think, as we're on this land and we're trying to take care of this land. Oh, I lost my mic. 1, 2, 3, 1. There, thank you. Sorry about yelling. And so as that dynamic is shifting, I think it is all absolutely about knowledge and not so much about power. And so if we consciously do that, we will be in a much better place. And great shout out to SEER. That was a great organization and a great program. So thank you.
Actually, a continuance of that. When it comes to the professions where there are the official designations, law, medicine, et cetera, how do we legitimize our knowledges? How do we gain that legitimacy within the institutions so that we don't have to hire from the south to bring them north, and we don't have to send our people south to be educated in a way that doesn't actually gel with our cultural backgrounds?
I can start maybe and go from there. We're having mic issues here. I think more and more of our people are having those professional designations anyway. I'm an RPF. I think about a friend of mine who's from Pessamit, who is a surgeon. He was the first chief surgeon, Innu, and then he became the director or president of the Surgeons Association in Quebec. And that has changed the way that association interacts with their professionals. In the Canadian Institute of Forestry, we have more and more Indigenous foresters influencing the relationship of that designation and the responsibility of those professional associations and how they interact with the sector. And so I think the more that we have professionals and people who are trained and accredited who are working in those systems, the more those will change. The other thing is we also need to create our own parallels. So part of what the Boreal Guardians program is doing is that it's creating its own network of professional guardians. And guardians are people who are essentially, the community's eyes and ears on the land. But they're not just monitors. These are people who are translating and integrating and utilizing their values and making those relevant to very real decisions on things like land use, on large development projects, on things that will impact us for generations to come. And so creating our own networks and our own systems of professionals is very important. And so that's what I think is really important, great about the Guardians program and the spread of the students, these Northwest Territories and Yukon, but we also had students from Manitoba, we had students from BC, and so we're really starting to have a good spread of what that looks like in being a professional Indigenous manager of lands.
Yeah, there are more and more examples of trying to bridge that chasm, in a sense. The Akitsarak Law Program, which was out of the University of Victoria, and I think they did a second one with University of Ottawa, had a program that was based in Nunavut. Largely, there were a few experiences that they had to come down to Victoria to take part in, but largely it was it was decentralized, and so you actually had a parade of some of the best law professors in the country who were attracted simply to the novelty of the experience. I imagine you have the similar dynamic at Deshinta. And so actually the quality of education was immensely superior to what you would get at a garden variety U of Vic law program. And that was supported by childcare and elders and residents and access to traditional teachings to complement the core law material. And all of those students, almost all of them, but one perhaps, I think have been called to the bar since. They're all Inuit students. Before that, there was one Inuit lawyer, and he happened to be the premier of the territory at the time, Paul Okalik. And now there's, easily 15 or 20 of them. So it's pretty remarkable it can happen.
Yeah, I think just quickly, it's about, lots of times people talk about Indigenous education, they're like, oh, it's lowering the bar, it's not a real great help, and it's like, no, it's about redesigning the bar and then redesigning the whole system and also making that value of learning for your whole life a continuum. So we're doing things like training doctors and training teachers and training people who aren't Indigenous but who are serving Indigenous people to continue their growth and their education to continue to be better. So I think it's about redesign and ultimately system change about what's, what's professional, what counts, and making sure that there's space and that that knowledge can lead.
I'd like to, I have a question back here. I'd like to add that I think that a lot of the challenge, like a lot of the change that you're talking about, and indeed, which is why we're here, the Indigenous Innovation Summit, but a lot of that change I find is really difficult. Like it's like, sometimes you may have one or two people that are in those systems that they become kind of the predecessor almost to the person who can facilitate the change. Like it often takes a long time. And it's very tough to undo systems, to shift them. But it sounds like we're kind of at a tipping point, that there's a tipping point that we're heading to. And it's very exciting. It's very exciting to hear this discussion as being, it being implemented across the country and in all different sectors. And so, very exciting. We have Dr. Mark Akwash here.
Oh, bonjour. Aujourd'hui, que dis Nicolas Nimkigan do them. I just had a question. It may not be a question that you can really answer, but maybe a challenge. And it comes out of the RCAP report. It talks about education as a form of economic development. So maybe what you may think about or consider as an answer would be, how would you address Indigenous education as a form of economic development?
So one thing that Kristen touched on and that we've really been pushing is in the north, obviously our economic development is focused on extracting what's under the ground and that our resources are under the ground. And we've been saying, our resources aren't under the ground, they're on top of our shoulders. And they're in our memories, and they're in our stories, and they're in the strength of people. And so we've been really pushing the idea that of what does a knowledge economy look like in the north that's based around the circulation of capital through people sharing and being teachers and being participants in teaching and learning from each other. Because right now, the way that capital flows where we live is a lot of money gets invested to take things out of the ground, and then it leaves the territory. And so what we've done, and we've done a lot of research around how capital flows around investment with Deshinta and how money circulates when you're hiring a lot of people who are living and working in community. And what we've largely found is that when that money is circulating in community, it stays in community, sometimes circulating 9 or 10 times before it leaves. So I think the role of an Indigenous education and economic development is that can be a paradigm shift for what we consider to be economic development and what counts as benefit and impact, and rethinking how we circulate money and how we use money for change, and how we can realign some of that power by investing in people instead of investing in product.
I would say Thomas Berger's report, when he looked at how implementation of the modern land claim agreement in Nunavut was going, he issued the phrase, no implementation without education. And he said, without proper investment in education, the benefits on paper that treaties are supposed to hold, modern treaties in his case, are not coming to fruition because we're not making those investments. And that needs, therefore, to go beyond education for humanities, social sciences, the helping professions, and into things like finance and entrepreneurship and HR and so on. And how do you indigenize those core kinds of business offerings and business development offerings in a way that is both attractive and resonant with culture?
Yeah, and I think to complete that as well, if you think about our context currently and with climate and our environment and the state of our environment and the cost of management when we make mistakes is unbelievable. And so having a knowledge economy and folks like the Guardians take care of lands is actually great for the economy. And so if we have Guardians right across the country, we're going to have the best managed ecosystem in the world. And we will have much less risk, and we will do much better by the climate. And so I think education is, and your question is very, very relevant, and thank you for that.
And I'd like to thank our panelists once again. We were discussing the role of universities and post-secondary institutions in taking innovation to research, teaching, and community development. So please thank our panelists.